Hello. Welcome to the first episode ever with Abby Teixeira. I am so excited about this series, The Cycle Breakers Sacred Boundaries. We are a show that is a transformational experience where we are guiding conscious conversations to meet embodied wisdom. Each episode is going to invite visionary healers, thought leaders, and change makers to share their journeys of awakening and offering our listeners practical tools and soul stirring insight to reclaim their inner authority. So, without further ado, I would love Abby to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what she does. And then we're going to go into being a cycle breaker. Welcome, Abby.
Hello, thank you so much, Nicole. I'm so excited to be here in this fresh new energy of this fresh new year. I am Abby Teixeira, and I'm a speaker, I'm an author, I'm a published writer and author. I'm a trauma recovery coach, feminine business mentor, and I'm also a complex trauma survivor. Most importantly, my greatest gift is being a mother of four. I help cycle breaking women, especially moms, healers, coaches, and creatives of the global majority. So these are Black, Indigenous women of color, rise from survival and really lead from their truth. And this is the work that I have really embodied in my own journey. My work blends identity shifting transformational coaching, ancestral wisdom, feminine leadership to help guide others to reclaim their voice, their power, their purpose. Because there's so many of us, as you'll hear, that we have stories, we have wisdom, we have lived experience. And I'm also the a guide and somebody has built movements, several movements. So the Healing Moment Collective, the Reclaim and Rise gatherings. And I truly believe that it is in our lived experience that's where the medicine lives and that the medicine the world needs. And so it's an honor to be here today to share a little bit about my story, my journey, and and to continue with the ripple effects of my life's work.
Yeah, I know when we first met, your story was so near and dear to my heart because I too have dealt with estrangement. And so, for those who aren't familiar with your story, why don't we start at the beginning and share a little bit about it? And for anybody who loves to read, she did a full spread, front cover spread in our magazine. So, we will link that below as well.
hmm Um, with the limited time that we have, I will definitely narrow it down to kind of the pertinent points of what we're going to discuss here today. So, as I mentioned, I am a Latina Canadian. My parents immigrated to Canada. I'm currently on Treaty 6 territory from El Salvador. So, this is a small country in Central America. This was in the mid 80s when there was a very violent civil war happening there. And my dad was a child soldier in that war at age 14. My mom, she was 17 when she had me. And actually, we were sponsored as refugees to Canada during that very violent time because both of their lives were in danger. And on the way to Canada, we stopped over in Mexico because my mom was, I think, she was like 8 months pregnant. And then there was some paperwork delays and all this kind of stuff. So that's where I was born. I spent the first 6 months of my life there. My birth story is wild. There's just a lot has happened really early on in my life. That was a lot of trauma. And I do come from a lineage of, just poverty and addiction and war and trauma, so much trauma. And the biggest cycle that I can claim that I have really stepped into intentionally breaking is the cycle of silence. And so that is something that I really stepped forward to because a lot of these things that happened to my grandparents and great grandparents, I don't even know their stories because nobody talks about these things, right? Like we live in it's ingrained in us that whatever happens to us, we keep it to ourselves. We don't, especially within the family system. There isn't really any discussion around it. And so, fast forward moving to Canada, my parents were very young immigrants, worked very, very hard, English as a second language, all of that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, behind closed doors at home, my dad was struggling with severe PTSD, depression, anxiety, all sorts of mental illness, and he took it out on me and my sisters. And so we grew up in a very violent, volatile, alcoholic home, and experienced abuse in all forms. So I'll keep it at that. And as I mentioned, this isn't stuff that we talk about. My mom I talk about this all the time. At 9 years old, I clearly remember telling her, Mom, why am I always so sad? And the answer that she could give me, she just looked at me, kind of with this blank stare in her eyes and, just said, just don't think about it. Just don't think about it and it'll just go away. And it was the most dissatisfying answer for me because it was like, if it was only that easy, I would have done it already. And that really evolved into me having these fantasies, as a child of like, imagine if I lost my memory. And imagine if I did lose my memory, which memories would be a priority to lose? Like it was that difficult for me to really hold everything that I had experienced and with it nowhere to go. And so, so that led me into at age 15 into addiction. So pretty much from day one of trying alcohol for myself, just really sent me down a spiral because it wasn't even so much the substance itself, it was what it did to me and what it didn't do. And so for the first time ever, the first time I drank to black out, I didn't have to think about all the things that I had gone through. I didn't have to, feel all the pain and the sadness and the grief and all of that kind of stuff. And so that was instant addiction for me. It was like a medication, for the first time of having, you can imagine having a severe migraine headache. And living with this all of your life. And, you finally find this like medication that numbs that like, and then you finally like it's not there anymore. Yeah, it was instant for me. And so that took me down this path of 15 years of active addiction, functional addiction, I will say, because and this is something that I'm very passionate about speaking on too, is especially as women and femmes, it's something that's not we fly very much under the radar, with our alcohol use, right? Like and for me, like I said, from the very get-go, it was very intense. It was a very intense usage. I was a blackout drinker, all of that kind of stuff. But and like I said, I was still functioning in society. I finished high school on time. I went to university. I got my nursing degree. I got an amazing job. And a few years after that, I met my husband, my now husband. We've been together now for almost 18 years. And, when we started a life and had a beautiful home and cars and all of the things, traveling, you would never know, what was happening behind closed doors. And it was that I was really suffering in silence. I was in a lot of pain, because of course, not only just the childhood trauma, but then also the results and kind of the consequences of leading a life of addiction add even more to that pile of trauma that was unresolved. And it was just, I was really spiraling. It got to the point where I ended up in trouble with the law, once in my early 20s, and then again was my last rock bottom. And so that's where everything kind of changed for me. I was on the cusp of my 30th birthday and once again ended up in jail. And this time it was very different for me. I just woke up from that experience and literally, truly woke up, to what was happening in my life and where I was going and what this lifestyle was leading me to. And it was really leading me to death. They say that addiction leads to one of three places, an institution, hospitals, or death. And I had already been in institutions, I had already been hospitalized, and I was very much nearing death. And so I knew that there was just this tiny little glimmer that was flickering inside of me that said, you're better than this. You can change. Like we need help. It's time for this cycle, to stop. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. I had no idea what this journey was going to look like. I just knew that I just couldn't keep living the way that I was living up until that point. And so I made that very um, powerful, life-changing decision. And then it was about managing that decision a day at a time, a day at a time, sometimes a minute at a time, an hour at a time. And through that, I really, really threw myself into healing, first in recovery, from addiction, 12-step programs, all of that kind of stuff, therapy, group therapy, all of that kind of stuff. And little by little, I started to, so for first during those first few years, I just was really in hermit mode. So I just kind of disconnected from the world and really, really focused on my healing because my life depended on it at that time, and really threw myself into that, and disconnected myself from all social media, from everything for 4 years. And so this was 10 years into mine and my husband's relationship, and we decided to have a baby. So I was about 4 years into my healing and recovery journey at that time. And for whatever reason, I got this internal nudge that, now was the time for me to kind of reemerge into the world and, kind of open up my apps again and social media and all of that kind of stuff. And so I made the bold decision to actually uh, publicize my Instagram in particular, and so it was no longer private. And then I started to share my journey in very small, subtle little ways, like I share in my article that I wrote, just kind of sharing vaguely what I had been experiencing and what I had been moving through in the last 4 years. And surprisingly, it got attention. People started to relate to what I was sharing, and people started to ask questions. And the more I started to kind of process and heal out loud, the more I would get, DMs of people kind of saying, hey, like, you put words into something that I have been experiencing, or, there's a loved one that I'm seeing kind of navigating this same journey. And, what are some thoughts that you have on this, or what can I do? And like all this kind of stuff. So the conversation started happening, and it really took me by surprise. I was like really, really surprised because I mean, obviously growing up in a home where none of this stuff is talked about, and very much there's a lot of gaslighting, there's a lot of minimizing and justifying and all of that kind of stuff. And so for a long time, as a child and as a teen, I thought I was the crazy one, right? Like, maybe I was too much or too dramatic, and all of the things that you hear as a survivor. But no, it was actually, I was naming things that had really kept me in bondage for a very long time. And so from there, began speaking publicly, on podcasts and summits, and then eventually in person. And then yeah, then it just literally, it's like the rest is history, like just really, really started stepping boldly into, finding my voice, reclaiming my voice. And then it wasn't until a few years ago where I really took a step back after, it's been, I want to say, about 6 years of this journey, of this like really, really being public and speaking out and all that kind of stuff. And I just kind of took a step back, and I started to realize this is so much bigger than me, because as I started to listen to these internal nudges and really think about my impact and what I wanted to create in the world, I went into coaching. I got my certification. I started working one-on-one with women who were very much like me, and I started to see the transformations before my eyes. And I thought, like, wow, the ripple effects of what this work is doing, right? And how that they were now starting to these women were now going into their homes, and they were healing themselves, healing their lineages, and healing their family systems. And then what that will do, so that the next generation, the kids, especially me now as a mom of four, I see that, right? And so this mission has become so much bigger than me, and I truly feel that it is in me stepping into truth, into really dismantling the ideas that things are unspeakable, that we can't speak these things, that this is too much, or all these kind of things. It's like, no, like this is what we need to name these things. We need to name the harms, because not only does it kind of heal a part of me, but it also to give the opportunity for somebody to see themselves, even if just a little bit, in my story, is incredible, because I know what that looked like and what that felt like for me, the early on, when I started to hear others really relate to my story and started to hear their stories, right? And I was like, this was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I was like, oh, like I'm not the only one. There are other people that have gone through these kind of things. There's nothing inherently wrong with me. I'm a survivor, then I'm not the only one. Right. And so this is why I'm excited to dive into this topic today of what it looks like to be a cycle breaker and all the complexities, because, like most things, it can turn into a buzzword. Right. And so I really want to be able to shed light as to what the path of a cycle breaker can really look like from my own lived experience and from those that I walk beside and along with.
I love this so much because I'm going to rehash some of the words that you said because like you said, it's a path, right? There's so much complexity to this. And some of the things that I heard were medicine, loneliness, gaslighting, um, feelings and feeling crazy. I can identify with that so much and feeling so crazy so often. And actually being told, you also used the word silenced. And I wanted to make sure to say that word because when I said I'm speaking my truth, I was told, well, I'm speaking my truth. And that's what they said to me. And I'm like, but that's gaslighting me again because my truth
Hmm.
is my truth. And yes, you can have your truth and your perspective as well, but you just gaslit me again, right? And
Hmm.
so there's this constant, I call it mind effery, if you will,
Hmm.
F-U-C-K word.
Yeah.
I don't know what we can and can't say anymore. Everybody's getting like banned for saying things. So
Yeah.
I'm careful with my language. But it's these mind games, this mind effery that gets played. And so then we do think that we are crazy. And then there's the guilt phase, right? Of like breaking up the family. And I had one of my, well, not one, I only have one sibling, my brother. He said to me, but family's supposed to stay together. And I said,
Mm.
but it's not suiting me to stay with that family member because my life is so much better without them. Like, why
Mhm.
would I go back to that? And I'm like, does that person make you feel good when they say this? No. Okay. And when they do this, how did you feel? Horrible. Okay. Well, I don't want to participate in that anymore. But we are so conditioned to believe that we have to do things. We have to keep the family together, right? And so
Mm.
I think as somebody encompasses this whole cycle breaking term, if you will, it's not just one thing, and everybody's journey is going to have parts that we all weave together and we can find
Mhm.
similarities. But I think we also experience different things. Like I didn't experience the addiction part, although I think I could probably say that food might be part of my addiction, or
Mhm.
think I could go there. But
Yeah.
my brother did. And so each of us has a different journey with estrangement, abandonment, gaslighting, trauma. His story's different than mine, although we have very similar stories. We grew up in the same households. We have different experiences and everybody's always said, "How did you guys come out so different?" And I'm like,
Mm.
I don't know, right?
Mhm.
So, as we go on this journey through all of these weeks, I think it's going to be really important for us to help people understand and hold space for the compassion that we need to have for somebody during this journey. Because whether you're at the beginning, I've got chills, and whether you're at the beginning going, oh my gosh, I think I need to break a cycle,
Mm.
or you're in the middle of breaking the cycle, or you're more towards the other side where you've got this beautiful community and space and you've done all the work. I mean, it always continues, but
Mhm.
no matter what phase you're in, we have to have compassion for ourselves during that part, right?
Absolutely. And, cycle breaking is it's definitely not a role. Like I didn't, that on that day 11 years ago, over 11 years ago, I didn't wake up and I was like, I'm going to be a cycle breaker. That wasn't at all in my trajectory, like I mentioned, right? It wasn't a role that I chose lightly. It was something that I woke up into. Right. And it didn't feel empowering at first. It was heavy, it was lonely, it was confusing, it was terrifying. It's just for me, it was really about realizing that I just could no longer survive the way that my lineage had, because again, the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. My dad was turned to addiction to deal with his trauma or not deal with it, and I was doing the same. And I saw, the path that it was leading to towards, and I just said no. Like I can't. I don't want to continue on this path and continue these cycles, right? And so it was really something that um it was like for a lack of a better word, it was truly like an awakening, right? And it wasn't necessarily like, 'cause I get this question a lot, where it's like, what was the one moment, or, and there was many moments, there was many more moments. It was like a series of cracks, if you will, that really, really began to shift, my perspective, and shift, the trajectory of my life and all of that kind of stuff, right? But there's a lot of truths that we need to kind of understand when we take on this role, and we lead in this role, is that there's so much grief, right? There's grief before clarity, right? Like the amount of clarity that I have today as we sit here and speak, is worlds different than it was even a year ago, because of the immense amount of grief that I have had to move through in the last year, in my journey. Confusion before empowerment, the confusing, like, why can't they get this? Why can't they see me? Like, why can't all of these things, right? Before like truly stepping into that empowerment portion. And then there's the loneliness that comes before the sovereignty, right? Because in the beginning, like I said, that for those first 4 years where I was in like hermit mode, and just like, really, really enclosed myself, it felt lonely, because all of my friends that I had up until that point all started to kind of drift away, because the commonality that we had, which was the partying and the drinking, when you take that away, I was no longer really welcome there, nor did I want to be in those circles anymore, right? Because I wasn't about, going out and drinking to blackout anymore, and partying and all of that kind of stuff, right? And, this journey for me has become incredibly spiritual, but it wasn't always that way, right? Like it was more so sobering rather than spiritual in the beginning. And just really learning to that deeper inner knowing that whatever it is that I was starting to face, the patterns that started to come up for me and all of that kind of stuff, naming that, like, this stops with me, and nothing blew that wide open for me more than becoming a mother, right? Like I mentioned, I had a little bit of a foundation before I had my first child. I had gone through, some pretty significant changes and growth and healing. And I was like, oh, like I felt grounded, stepping into this new most important, um I guess, version of myself, which was being a mom, right? And in the beginning, it's like, oh, okay, have this sweet little baby, and like, you're doing all these primal things, changing diapers and feeding and all this stuff. Then suddenly, when they start to evolve and hit the toddler stages, and they have all these big emotions, it was like, whoa, like that really started to show me some of the patterns that I started to that were starting to become repetition, right, from what I experienced as a child. And then really having the self-awareness to know that, no, like this doesn't sound like me, this sounds like my dad, and this is not something I want to bring into my home. This is not something that I want to continue and repeat. And so therefore now I need to make these changes and break that cycle, right? And so just really understanding that a lot of the symptoms aren't they're not the problem, they're the evidence, right? And it's really and like when we think about like healing and all of that kind of stuff, we think like, I'm going to become this new person, and I don't believe that. I believe that, when we are born with this purity, right? With this, and even as children, like I look at my children, and they have these beautiful personalities and these quirks and these things, and I want to nurture it so much rather than shut it down, right? And I want them to always know who they are, and go back to, and always have that grounding point of like, this is who I am, right? That all of me, that this wholeness, right? Like all of me should be accepted, all of me should be loved. I shouldn't hide these parts of me and all of that kind of stuff. What happens as survivors is that we go through life, and we learn, to survive life by shutting down a lot of these parts of us, right? And then it's about finding that, when we enter into that healing recovery journey, it's about going back and discovering who I was before all the trauma, before all the world told me who I was, all of that kind of stuff, right? So yeah.
Mm. This is going to be an amazing series. I mean, we're going to dive even deeper in the next part that we're going to be talking about is about sacred grief, and
Mhm.
how sometimes you can't stay connected to the people that you love the most, and what
Mhm.
that looks like, and how grief comes up in your body in your everyday life when you are dealing with estrangement and cycle breaking or anything along those lines, and how the loved ones around you react. It's quite interesting. So that's going to be our next show. So if you haven't liked, shared, and subscribed, definitely do all of those. Well, as we move through the end of this show, I just want to thank you because as you have claimed your sovereignty and this, identity, if you will, you are helping so many people. And I remember when I first read your article and I messaged you and I said, thank you for giving me words to something that I didn't even really know existed. I dealt with my estrangement all on my own. And like you, I thought I was crazy. And so now you are breaking cycles for other people as at the same time you're breaking them for yourselves, you're also teaching your children and the people around you how to go about breaking cycles and the burden that, that pain can cause. And so I just really appreciate that you've been willing to go on this journey with us and that we get to have you for an entire year to talk about all of this. So thank you so much. Do you have any
Thank
parting
you.
words?
Yeah, like if you're here, something in you already knows, that you're either a cycle breaker, you're a change maker, right? Because this community is the sovereign community, right? And that really is the goal, is becoming sovereign, right? And so you're in the right place, right? And awakening doesn't mean that you're ready. I sure as heck was not. It just meant that I was ready to be honest, right? And that we don't have to heal our whole lineage all on our own, right? We just know that, like, for me, it's just about not passing it down, right? And so I'm so excited to be able to dive deeper into this discussion, this super important topic, and that, like you said, to be able to name something that maybe you've been living with, feeling, but just never had the words to be able to, or even the courage to be able to name out loud, right? If I'm able to do that, then my mission is complete. And so I'm so excited for the rest of the 10 sessions that we're going to have together. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. And for anybody who's watching, definitely check out all her details will be in the show notes and, subscribe so you can get the other 10 episodes with us. Everything is completely free. And if you want to chat with her, come into our community, community.sovereign-magazine.com. She's also in there with a beautiful community as well. So yeah, we will see you on the next one. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.